Hello, this is Ron Gerber from Angelbeat. I'm so excited to have Merritt Baer, one of AWS's top security architects and experts. Merritt has a wealth of experience. She's a graduate of both Harvard and Harvard Law, so she brings tremendous insights and a diverse set of technical, legal, compliance insights to the world of cloud security. There is so much heightened interest in using technology to help all of us get through the coronavirus. So I want to turn it over to Merritt now to share with all of you out there in the digital Angelbeat community her insights on how to go about building an infrastructure, a strategy to incorporate security in all of your technological initiatives, which hopefully will include the AWS cloud. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to Merritt. Thank you very much, and all yours.
Thanks, Ron. Hello, and thanks for listening. This is Merritt Baer. I am a principal security architect at AWS. I joined about 2 years ago now, having come from U.S. government work. I've worked in all three branches, again in security on behalf of the American people. And as Ron mentioned, I am a graduate of Harvard and Harvard Law. I ran my own small shop advising young companies on business and legal and security ramifications, and now work for AWS in strategic initiatives. I work across security and emerging technologies, from youngest new applications of technologies in rapid prototyping, to working with some of our most established customers and their CISO teams. For the first 18 months or so of my work at AWS, I was advising customers who are in global accounts, which is basically the Fortune 100s around the world. So the talk that I'm going to share with you today comes from some lessons learned in terms of growing up your SOC, your Security Operations Center, to be cloud native, to be mature and sophisticated, and to leverage all the benefits of cloud. I call this build a machine. The machine is notional. We're not going to have a physical machine to hand out at the end of this or anything. But the idea is, as one of our distinguished engineers, Eric Brandwein, says, if it's not someone's job, it's a hope, and a hope is not a plan. So to be able to change culturally and operationally the way that you do business in your security team, you need to make a quote unquote machine, turn it into the way that you do business, become a process-driven place. Those of you who have worked in cloud before will recognize that this foundational slide always comes up. So security and compliance is a shared responsibility. This is a picture of the shared responsibility model. So the top layers of the stack, everything from layer 4, the hypervisor, on up, are customer responsibility. And that's because only customers know what they want to do in cloud. So customers own their own data, they own their own content, they own their own operations, and manage the security and compliance of those. Whereas AWS, or your cloud provider, manages those bottom layers of the stack. So layer 4, the hypervisor, on down to the concrete floor. Everything from physical, protection layers from the fence and the guards outside to the HVAC and other, complex managerial duties that we take on with large-scale physical infrastructure. And that is basically the value proposition of the cloud. So I often start by talking to my Fortune 100s, and I just say, tell me about your security team. So, who owns what? Who owns architectural decisions, budget decisions? How do you make decisions around protective, detective, and responsive security controls? Some of that includes your logging and monitoring. How do you decide what your source of truth is going to be? And how do you extract actionable intelligence from that to be able to do incident response, among other things? One of the things I want you to walk away from this with is the kind of impetus to hit the reset button on what's in place now. So we will go through and talk a little bit about how to optimize some of the ways that we can grow up your SOC. And the idea is that, you take stock of where you are and can take this back to your home institution and say, let's hit the reset button, let's ask what's in place, and let's make it better. So let's start with just the basics. Who's your point of contact? AWS sends out AWS abuse emails and other notifications that will sometimes actually speak to current landscape level threats, but they also give you specific information about potential security indicators that we are seeing on our side. And a lot of the time, we don't get responsiveness from customers. And that could be because John from IT, left the company 2 years ago, and he's the one whose email address is in that field. It could be that John from IT doesn't know what to do with that, notification or how to act upon it. It could be that John from IT actually thinks it might be his fault and doesn't want to actually raise it. So making sure that you have a process in place, and it starts with getting the mail to a person, or more likely to an alias, a team of folks where you have already decided whose responsibility it is to kind of take in the mail and decide how to deal with that. Does it become a ticket in your SIM system? What does that look like? How do you mark whether it's been done or not? It just starts with these basic getting the mail. Now, as I referred to in the title, part of this is building a machine for actionable security. So, for example, Guard Duty is AWS's intrusion detection and prevention IDS system. Everything in Guard Duty is a true positive in the sense that it really happened. By the way, turn on Guard Duty if you are not already. It's a really good value proposition. But basically, once you get that alerting that says there's an unusual login, let's say, what do you do about that? How do you turn that into something that you're going to make actionable? What are you doing? Does it become a security ticket? What are you doing with your last month of security tickets? How are you extracting insights from that? How are you getting better? How are you growing up your SOC? Until we get some other system, AWS is included in that. Basically, the ticketing system is how we are all captive to responding. And you really can't overestimate the importance of building a low latency, fully API-driven ticketing system so you can track popularity, get a human path to escalation, and automate as much as you can from there. Part of building this machine, there will be human inputs, but what we want to get to is minimizing that gray area where it requires a human decision maker. So some of the benefit here of being in cloud is that you can automate yourself out of a job in large part. So one of the ways that we do this culturally that is reflective of the technology itself at Amazon is to just not close trouble tickets until you've scripted a remediation. So the idea is that you only ever solve each problem once, and you should never have to see it again. It should then be scripted out. So our SOC is a guy with a cell phone, and the reason we're able to minimize the human interaction is that we've done so much of the front end automation decisions. So everything that requires human decision making is something that's either new threats that haven't been seen before, or extremely high value, needing a human decision maker to make a value judgment. But the kinds of run-of-the-mill alerting and, once you've gotten that meeting the mail kind of system in place, you've got your remediations in place to deal with it. Part of this includes runbooks for what to do with findings and how and when to escalate. So your incident response team should have, thought through how you're going to deal with common scenarios. Again, minimizing that gray area for human decision maker. Our CTO, Werner Vogels, commonly says, get the humans away from the machines. In addition to being inefficient to have humans make these value calls as they go, it also introduces room for human error. So it's much better if you can use tools like CloudWatch events, Amazon Inspector, config rules. These are all a Lambda function under the hood. and they allow you to automate. So this is part of being cloud native, is leveraging that capability to automate yourself out of a job. One of the front-end decisions you'll want to include is controlling public access. So, S3 buckets, among other resources, at an account level. Now with AWS organizations, you can do this through what are called SCPs, service control policies. So you can just top down, whitelist or blacklist, including putting opinions in there, like, for example, turning on block public access for S3 buckets. So some of these are your front-end decisions that allow you to top down, and others might be to whitelist, something like CloudTrail, which forces your logging and monitoring to stay on so that no individual could turn off. CloudTrail logs all the API calls that are made or even attempted, and it logs, who tried to do what and when. So for your forensics, for your, figuring out what permissions are scoped correctly, all of those things, you'll want to have CloudTrail turned on. And ultimately, what this means is that you move from a DevOps to a DevSecOps model. It means that you basically grow up your security machine to be part of your development cycle. So rather than being siloed and being kind of the no man or woman, your security team becomes part of just how you do business. And this means that you want to be hiring folks on your security team who think this way or who live this way. It gets addictive once you automate one thing. So think of it in terms of solving big problems by solving small problems. It's easier to lose 5 pounds than 30. So accrete a machine here.
One of the things, Merritt, I've seen too when you talk about automating yourself out of a job, what you're really talking about is getting rid of all these incredibly tedious tasks that are error-prone, and then giving you the opportunity by using this AWS technology to pursue more strategic initiatives, to not just try and consolidate data, but to help you analyze it. It'll make you a more valuable employee, help you progress more in your career, and it will also help your employer do better and embrace digital transformation.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, I sometimes get questions from folks who wonder if automation is removing, the need for humans, or whether it's going to basically kill jobs. And my response is always that we should be automating everything that, anything that can be automated means that a computer can do it better. That doesn't mean that everything can be automated, right? Those need to involve decision-making and value judgment calls. They still require a lot of humans to make some of the frameworks around it. So as you're making these run books for what to do, for example, or even as you're thinking through your ticketing system and how you're going to turn your security tickets into a data lake, let's say, from which you can extract analytics insights, humans are the ones that run those kinds of queries. So we want to be able to leverage humans for the things that humans are good at, which are, or really necessary for, which are those kind of value judgment calls, business bottom line decision making, and security teams are part of that now, versus just having humans there doing manual processes that would be better off being automated. And this is part of growing up, is that you minimize that manualness, which, yeah, as you say, both increases your kind of accuracy and also just minimizes the busy work and frees up your humans to be doing more important, more transcendental, more, next generation type of work.
I think it's also interesting, one final point, just to interject, and this is all public, probably 6 months ago or some period of time like that, Amazon announced a $700 million initiative to train some of its current factory workers to become data scientists. And so what Amazon's doing internally is they're going to increase their investment in real robots, the ones who pick goods out of its massive warehouses. And in doing so, because they have so many unfilled recs for data scientists, they're going to train their employees to focus on the issues of what do you do with information, not just consolidating it. And these people who worked in the warehouses already understand the Amazon culture, are excited about progression, and that's, I think, a good example of how AWS is using automation and also reflects the tremendous demand for individuals who are skilled in understanding and analyzing and taking actions based on data.
Yep, that's right. I mean, I think that most sophisticated organizations at this point are thinking through not just what their workforce looks like today, but what they want it to look like in the future. And so that means re-envisioning pipelines for talent and emphasizing, diversity and inclusion in ways that we haven't been good enough at until now. And it also means training and retraining workers who may or may not have traditional backgrounds in terms of being like a computer science graduate. And, Amazon is certainly doing that ourselves. And we also see, others in the field taking that initiative. It's obviously a really fraught time right now. Today, let's see, it is March 20th, and we are in the midst of the COVID-19 fears and realities. And one of the ways we're seeing that play out is in jobs and job insecurity. So one element of this that Amazon is living is to, ramp up hiring and to think through how we're going to pipeline folks into sort of every generation of job that we need. And that's exciting. And folks who are listening to this, if you're interested in taking a look at what those kind of careers are, of course, the Amazon job site is there. And I would encourage folks to also think through, what these kind of next iterations of jobs will look like. So for example, I referred to automation here and these tools like Amazon Inspector and CloudWatch events and config rules. Under the hood, those are AWS Lambda functions. Well, Lambda is serverless, and what we're really seeing is a move towards serverless. So folks who are interested, for example, that might be an area you want to go chase down. There are definitely really strong appetites for folks who are interested in training and reskilling to be able to work with some of these tools that we're developing and imagining, and it's important to have humans, participate in this deliberately because, of course, technology is human-made. So it is the product of all of us. Let me swing right back in here. So DevSecOps is the idea that your security is integrated into your pipeline, into the way that you do business. This means that you are moving from that waterfall methodology where you might spend relatively long cycles, everything from 6 weeks to 6 months or longer. U.S. government folks listening in are probably thinking, no, our goals are often set 18 months in the future, right? And when you work towards a pretty far off goal, what you end up doing is losing the agility to kind of reassess and constantly reinform your pipeline. So moving to an agile methodology where you constantly deliver on smaller timelines, on smaller goals, and continually reassess. And of course, this is like very cloud native in the way that you are working, because you can spin up and down resources on demand. You can change your approach. You can change which resources you're committed to, without having to commit to the infrastructure itself. When you involve cloud, you are really nimble to be able to spin up and down resources. So part of this is about building a culture of taking an iterative approach. This is a customer story. Feel free to go to this link at the bottom for a little more information. But one example, this is a customer that called White Ops, just coincidentally has the word ops in their name, but they are a bot detection service. So they're trying to prevent fraudulent links or clicks on links, I should say, trying to detect odd behavior that looks like fraud. And to do that, they need really short latencies, 10 millisecond latencies, so that they can stop attacks as they happen. And they do, at this point, 150 billion transactions a day, which has scaled up significantly compared to 20 billion in 2016. And the way that they do that is on AWS using these kind of virtual processes. And, they're running on these basic EC2, EMR for data processing. And EC2 is our building block of compute. S3 is our building block of storage. So all AWS services that use either compute or storage are actually leveraging those basic building blocks under the hood. But this is a company that happens to be in the security space, and they are basically making use of our security tools and also of their own security processes to ensure that they follow a DevSecOps model that allows them to iteratively, innovate. So cloud scale security in itself is kind of the baseline of what we're talking about here. In one of the realities in this new world is infrastructure as code. This means that you can do security as code. So we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it means you can validate your architectures mathematically. It means that you can deploy immediately. So you can grab a CloudFormation or a Terraform template, and what you experience on the AWS console is is code, is lines of resources saying that they are spun up. But of course, on the back end, what happens is physical resources spin up in the region that you have selected. So the experience of the user to not have to manage assets in the legacy sense, but to actually experience infrastructure as code is part of where we're starting here. Elastic security automation, so everything is an API, right? As I mentioned, CloudTrail will log those API calls. You can validate your security controls by looking at which API calls are going through, be able to do forensics, et cetera. But having the basic idea that everything is an API is cloud native. Runtime security. So I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about tag-based targeting and rip and replace. So basically, your web server gets popped and you take it down and spin up a new one. Well, you haven't solved your problem, right? So trying to get at core reasons or core threats here, it looks different in a cloud native architecture where you can have ephemeral architectures you can tear down and build up as needed. And then immutable infrastructure, so validation and enforcement, integration with managed services, which are where AWS does the management of this. Tags as security controls. So tags really is more well known as being a tool for billing, but it's a really powerful security control if you use it correctly. Tags allow you to have a lot of granularity about your information about your infrastructure. If you are using tags correctly, you can be using it both explicitly. So for security reasons, you could tag it, you could tag your resources with their classification level or compliance standard. That's an explicit security reason. But you could also use them for business purposes. So you can, tag based on your business units, based on test versus dev. You can ensure that you've classified your resources and be able to change these constantly. So tags, unlike resource names, are not fixed once they are assigned. You can continually update them. You can batch update them, so do it in large groups. And you can use tags to enforce actions and non-actions immediately. So this is one of those reset buttons. I encourage your organization to go back and ask, are we using tags efficiently? Are we leveraging the information and the actions that we could be taking to be able to automate based on how we have tagged our resources? So as I mentioned, this can be both a preventive and a detective security control if you think through how to put, preventive being actions you're just not going to allow to happen, and detective being actions that happen and you put some alerting on it and you're able to then extract insights and do analytics on that. One other aspect of build machine, of course, and I referred to this in the conversation about automation, is that you need to hire and develop the best. So here I often tell a story about my younger brother, Lyle. We were a foster family, and I have 3 brothers, but my youngest brother, Lyle, came to us as a foster child. And he's American Indian, he's Oglala Lakota, born on Pine Ridge, and I think as a result of just who he is in the world, he sees the world differently sometimes. And this became apparent in one story where I grew up in Colorado, so the assignment in preschool was for them to draw the mountains. You know, we're in the midst of the Rockies there. And the kids had all drawn these little triangles, and Lyle had drawn circles. And he came home and he had a 0 for his assignment. And, you know, we asked him, did you not understand it? You know, what was going on? And he said he had drawn them from the sky. So the idea here behind me kind of sharing this anecdote is that we realized at that point that he was seeing the world from a different perspective. So hiring folks that, you know, have different life experiences. This isn't about lip service to diversity, quote unquote. This is about the acknowledgement that technologies are human-made and that they are imperfect and flawed because they are human-made. It's not like a black hole in the solar system where it exists whether we know about it or not. You know, technology is a continually reimagined entity, and because of its human-madeness, those who participate in it will change what it is. So it's really important that we hire, you know, technology folks and security folks who, as I mentioned, sometimes get a reputation for just being the no man. It's important that we hire folks that look and think and approach problems differently. We know that people who have different backgrounds code differently. We know that they think through different problem-solving approaches. So hiring and developing the best is a, you know, business critical function, not just something you should do because it sounds good. To be able to do that, and frankly, for all of these processes that I have kind of exhorted folks to go reevaluate, you're going to need executive sponsorship. This photo here is kind of a joke because, at least at Amazon, our executives do not have wood burnished desks like this, but basically, you know, 100% of executives will say they care, but in reality, you need to manage this relationship. What does that look like? How do you, as the security folks, make sure that you communicate to your executives that this is really about everything from a bottom line perspective? It is really crucial that they answer the phone for security. You know, at Amazon, we have a culture of just escalating as a series of processes. So if you get a SEV1, it goes all the way up the chain to the highest levels of leadership. If you have a SEV2 ticket, it goes up to your manager immediately and then starts to continue to escalate. You know, we, rather than making it someone's human decision whether to escalate, we just have processes that say we will. And leadership needs to be part of that. They need to understand the importance here. They need to understand that it's going to be the way that you do business. So making sure that they understand that when we have given them notice, let's say through that AWS abuse email that you get, to hopefully that, you know, alias email list, like I said in that initial slide about getting the mail, you know, connect it for them to preventing that New York Times headline. We see a huge lag time in a lot of customers, even sophisticated customers, between getting that initial ping and doing something about it. So I just wanted to give a quick overlay here that as we talk about these security controls, you know, I'm not doing a deep dive on security services at AWS. I wanted to keep this notional in terms of being applicable to any cloud provider you might be using, but just to line these up so that you can understand where our services kind of align here. This goes through the life cycle of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So everything from, you know, IAM on the protective controls in terms of putting in policies for identity and access management that will allow or not allow individuals or actions to occur, through the protect and detect phases of logging and monitoring, so things like guard duty and inspector and security hub, things like our encryption choices under protect, so KMS, the key management service, et cetera, and then through to that response and recovery. So those automations I mentioned that basically are Lambda under the hood, to recovery, like making sure that you have snapshots and archives. Security controls are a great way to just think through how you want to, as we mentioned, sort of minimize that gray area where you don't need to be human decision-making at the time of an incident. So thinking through, what are you going to just protect and prevent from happening? What are you going to allow to happen but alarm on or detect? And how are you going to automate reactions or remediation? These are just some questions that I like to pose to customers. This is not the gospel. This is just Merit Bear's set of things that I think are useful. So on the preventive controls, what are you willing to just disable and, of course, enforce? Part of this is that political will. So it comes back to that executive buy-in. Folks on development teams may find it very inconvenient if you have put in more protective controls, but you need to have the political will to enforce them. What are your crown jewels? So how have you prioritized your data? And how have you put more protections around those crown jewels to make it more intuitive in terms of access control being more difficult the more important you go in your data classification? And then to be able to enforce that, how are your resources tagged? So we mentioned this with tagging as a security strategy, right? Getting your data classification levels in the form of tags. Under detective controls, what's your source of truth? So what are you going to use? Or in most cases, it's going to be a combination of sources of truth. But how are you going to bring those together, distinguish signal from noise, and then make it actionable, right? This might be that you bring in your Splunk dashboard or whatever else you've been using. Lots of partners run on AWS. If you have something you're attached to, you can probably bring that through and see it in your Security Hub dashboard, and be able to then integrate your sources of truth, but make some judgment calls about how you're going to do your logging and monitoring in a way that doesn't overwhelm, so that you can actually make things distinguishable and actionable. Can you represent your desired compliance states as rules? So this comes to that infrastructure as code that I alluded to earlier, and I will talk more specifically about in a little bit, but looking at how you can use formal methods, for example, to turn your policies into code and be able to enforce them in that sense. And then how do you derive security insights from the data? So once you've got your source of truth, what kinds of data lakes or other forensic kind of extractions can you be doing from those aggregations of information? So sophisticated organizations are actually pulling analytics on their security data. And yes, security folks in the room who are thinking, well, you'd have to secure that data if you're going to hold on to it. Absolutely. Thinking strategically about what you're going to hold on to over time to be able to do analytics on. That will always be a balancing act in terms of being responsible about your data management, not holding on to data that you can't or won't use, and ensuring that the data you do hold on to is minimized, is scrubbed, is encrypted, is protected, and has a life cycle to hopefully, get rid of it over time if it's not necessary anymore. Finally, on these responsive controls, as we mentioned, automation is really one of these key value adds of moving to the cloud. So how do you evaluate risk? How are you automating your security? And how have you automated your response to incidents? This is what an automation looks like if you're thinking in terms of a Lambda function on AWS. Just to give you some examples of some of these sources that might come in. So, the information itself like from CloudTrail or GuardDuty, you might spur a CloudWatch event that then goes through to spur a Lambda function. These are just examples of what it might look like to automate. So here are some takeaways. I'm going to do a quick wrap up and then kind of go into our next gen, sort of where do we go from here. So the life cycle of the security machine. First, the mail has to deliver. So who's on that email address list for AWS, for example? Two, how have we got it mechanized? So if you are going to turn that email into a SIM entry, how do you turn it into a work item that you track? And part of this is what's useful for you, for us as AWS to build out in the form of services. So for example, should AWS abuse reports be findings in Security Hub? That's something that, if you see a value for, please give us feedback. We build out a huge percentage of our services are in direct response to customers' feedback and their needs that they are citing to us. So let us know how we can help you with that. Three, what do you do about it? So now what? As I mentioned, these kind of ephemeral architectures mean that you haven't really solved the core problem if you just get rid of and spin up new resources. What you want to do is build a better process for figuring out how to minimize your access and get to, what some folks are calling zero trust these days, but really minimizing the exposure that you have and yet still allowing your core operations to go through. So this is something that everyone struggles with, including Amazon. It's just going to be an ongoing process. And that's kind of the uncomfortable part about security. But the re-evaluation, the revisiting of these kinds of controls will keep it current and keep your risk minimized. And then finally, some of this is addressed in the field, some of it turns into a service. So for example, watch your flow logs for anomalies turned into GuardDuty. S3 promiscuity turned into S3 block public access. So as I mentioned, if you come up with ways that AWS could be doing something better or differently that would serve your needs, please let us know. We are always, although we are in the kind of the cloud security model and that shared responsibility model, we care deeply about security in the cloud, about the way that customers are given the right tools to secure themselves. So how do we, best turn that into services when it makes sense to? And then finally, how does this look end to end? So how do your execs audit it? How have you handled it in the past? How do you wrap this fully? Next generation, in terms of what we are looking at and what I think are some cool things to share and to be thinking about. So first is getting to an investigation stage or capability. Second is I'm going to talk a little bit about our hardware. And third, I'm going to talk about formal verification and how we do that and why cloud matters. So traditionally, investigations are really resource intensive and time consuming. So it involves, collecting these huge amounts of log data, doing ETL tools, having to do custom scripting for it, finding the right set of visualization tools to be able to extract insights, and then getting those investigation questions into queries to help answer your questions, and doing this in a time frame that makes it actionable or relevant, right? So this is a huge lift. And as a result, we have a new service that we just unveiled at reInvent in November 2019 called Amazon Detective. So I encourage folks to get in and play around with this. There are some reInvent 2019 talks on this if you go to YouTube, but it allows you to analyze and visualize security data to rapidly get investigations, basically, and even get proactive about your potential security issues. Now I want to just touch on, again, we could spend a whole hour or longer on this, but the AWS custom hardware. So if you go to I think it's infrastructure/AWS, you can see a live map of our infrastructure. You can click on custom hardware and you will see some information there about our routers and switches and et cetera. But one thing to keep in mind is that we have moved in, I think it was 2012, AWS acquired a company, an Israeli cybersecurity hardware company called Annapurna Labs. and ever since we have been building out our Nitro system. So now all of EC2, which is our core compute, as I mentioned, runs on AWS Nitro. And this means that there are huge security gains from the fact that we have our custom hardware. This is one of the value adds that you get by deploying in the cloud, because no one else really has the resources to go do this for yourselves. But if you run on AWS, you benefit from all these security benefits of the Nitro architecture. So, you know, in CIA, or confidentiality, integrity, and availability, we're seeing huge gains here from a security standpoint. Again, I encourage you to go to YouTube, look at reInvent security features of Nitro architecture. There are full talks on there. And then finally, I want to talk just a little bit about what it means to experience infrastructure as code and then security as code. And what do I mean by that? So if we were live in the audience, I would ask if folks recognize who this is, but the photo or whatever drawing on this slide is of Euclid, because this goes at least as far back as Euclidean mathematics. The idea is that there are some formal truths that we accept to be true. So we, for example, we don't go out and try to count every prime number. We just accept them to be infinite. And so in that vein, if you sort of believe in math, then we can know certain things to be true mathematically. And so when we encode policies as logical formulas, we can then use formal methods, use this kind of math to validate the security of our systems. So at AWS, we use it in 4 main areas. There's a group that's dedicated to this called the Automated Reasoning Group, ARG. And again, you can go to reInvent and reinforce our security conference talks on YouTube and see more depth about this. But the orange here are the things that AWS uses it for. So we use it to validate that our crypto is correct. We use it to validate our protocols, our boot code. And then on the customer side, we use it to validate policies. For example, we have an engine called Zelkova that will validate your IAM permissiveness and tell you which policy is more permissive than another in absolute terms. And those of you who have worked in IAM know how it can get kind of convoluted once you've got long policies and you've got both identity or role-based permissions and resource-based permissions, and there could be escalation paths. You know, having an avenue for a computer to sort through those and to give you truths about it is hugely efficient. And then networks, so Tyros is a tool that does network reachability. So without sending a single packet, you can know as a matter of fact, for example, whether you have an internet-facing endpoint. And that can be valuable, not just for your security, but also for your compliance. So you can do continuous compliance, point your auditors to the fact that this tool can validate that you've done what you think you've done. Tyros is now part of AWS Inspector. One brand new tool that came out at reInvent is called Access Analyzer. So this uses Zelkova under the hood to do, validate that you have done what you think you've done. It will continuously identify resources with overly broad permissions based on use patterns. It will try to find avenues that, that resources could be accessed that you seem like you are not intending to have. So another thing to go explore, there was a talk on this from reInvent, but just wanted to give a heads up that there are new kind of cool applications for the automated reasoning group. And broadly, the kind of excitement that I have around this is the idea that when you have infrastructure as code, you can have security as code, you can encode policies as logical formulas. And this really means that you are getting the highest level of security, that if you, like I said, if you believe in math, then the things that you have enacted within your policies, that you can validate that those things are true. That is the content for today, but I encourage you all to feel free to reach out. I am on Twitter at MeritBear, or this is my email address, meritbear@amazon.com. And I also encourage folks to, as I mentioned, take a moment to look at our reInvent and reinforce videos on YouTube, and to take a look at our careers website, and feel free to send me emails if you have questions about that.
Merritt, that was absolutely fantastic. I also want to just make a couple of comments that you can also go to angelbeat.com if you've got questions about any other broader subjects. Within cloud security, it's always what I have seen a three-part strategy. There's the great things that the AWSs of the world done or doing. There is a need for third-party companies, traditional security vendors who can enhance and complement what AWS is doing. But in the end, you as an end user, you still have to be responsible for your data and the overall IT security strategy for your organization and for your applications. It's a rapidly changing world. I look forward to seeing you in the future when Angelbeat live events resume, hopefully in the June, July timeframe, if not a little bit sooner. Please make sure that all of you stay safe. Continue to rely upon angelbeat.com in the short term for really good digital information, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. Merritt, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I look forward to meeting folks in the future as well, and I just want to wish everyone, sanity and health in this kind of bizarre and difficult time. But hoping that folks can find opportunities to, find new paths for learning and for evaluating some of the work that you were doing. I think, at least for us internally, it's been a good transition point just to hit that reset button and think about really validating some of the value proposition of the work we're doing in security. And it is more important than ever.
That's right. I have no doubt that when we look back at the coronavirus, there will unfortunately be any number of examples that have not only by and large brought out the best in people, but unfortunately brought out the sad cyber criminal attacks where people take advantage of you. There's going to be ransomware, laden emails where click here to get the last batch of hand sanitizers. Let's all be safe. I appreciate everyone's time today. Unless there's anything else, Merritt, I'm going to end the webinar, and thanks, Merritt, for delivering such incredibly useful and valuable content.